I've been selling solar panels for years, used solar panels. And so in order to test these used panels, I've always just used a charge controller and done comparison tests to a newer panel or a new panel. So something like this hooked up to a little 12-volt battery and we could do testing. And then recently I realized that Amazon China, really just China, has given us these really cool testers that will plug right into a solar panel and give you a wattage number, a voltage open circuit number, a short circuit current number, all at once without having to use a multimeter or without having to use a charge controller. And that was really neat because then I could do comparisons between different panels really easy instead of using a charge controller. But I never could get the real scientific number because the thing with solar panels is it's based on the environment. How much sun is being put on the panels. So when they're going through their standard test conditions, their standard test procedures on solar panels, it's assuming that it's 1,000 watts per meter squared worth of light. And we can't always count on that, especially when it's cloudy or partly cloudy outside or we've got a haze. And then the other one, which is more concerning, is how hot they are. Because these panels under standard test conditions are 25 degrees Celsius, and that's like room temperature. And something that I also realized recently was that's 25 Celsius at the cell. That's not ambient temperature. If you've ever noticed when you put a solar panel out in the sun, the surface of that panel or the back sheet, anything on that panel is significantly hotter than the air around it. So I wasn't accounting for the temperature. And I make a guess because I've got panels at my house and I know that in the summertime when it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, they only perform at about 70–75%. So if I have a panel that I bring in and I put it out in the sun and let it heat soak a bit and it's getting 75%, I figure that's a pretty good panel. It's performing at about, 100% of what it should be. But I wanted to be able to do it scientifically. So that's what I'm gonna try today. So we're gonna use some simple math and kind of eliminating variables as much as we can in order to get a real number here. So let me show you what my test rig is set up with right now. My first tool here to eliminate the first variable is gonna be my perpendicularity meter. And bear in mind that this has moved just a tad bit. I say this has moved, the sun has moved just a tad bit since I got this set up. You'll see that there's a slight shadow on this side here. Now there's about a 10-degree range where shadowing is okay, shadowing tilt is okay, because like that's more where the sun is, right? Instead of right there. But we're gonna go with this. The other big piece is gonna be cell temperature. So I'm using my Klein multimeter here, and I realized that you can only just barely see that number, but it's 53 degrees Celsius, and I've got this taped to the back of the panel here. So that's gonna read our cell temperature. The first panel that we're playing with here is this 235 watt Sharp brand monocrystalline solar panel that was manufactured about 10 years ago, and it's been in service for about that long. I've got about 12 of these pallets left sitting in the warehouse, and I still need to take a few back to my house because I really want to keep some of these panels. All right, so we're at 52 Celsius. All right, another data point that we're gonna grab here is gonna be how much power is making it to the battery. So this is the BMS for this battery here that we're connected to. And we can see that we're seeing 185, it was up to 188 a second ago, watts, 188 watts into the battery. But what we're also gonna look at, we're not really gonna use that number very much, is the voltage and current. And this is on the solar wire running from the solar panel into the charge controller. So this is before we introduce any inefficiency losses from this charge controller. So let's take that over to our spreadsheet. So this is my spreadsheet that I've put together. So you can see here I've created a line for our 235 watt Sharp panels. The cell temperature was at 52 Celsius. The standard test condition watts was 235. That's off of the data sheet or off the back of the panel. This temperature coefficient of power, let me show you where I got that and what that means. That is over here, and I couldn't find the actual data sheet, but I found this website showing specs for this specific panel, and it shows that the temperature coefficient of power is negative 0.48% per Kelvin. Now, Kelvin and Celsius are the same absolute number, so I can use that in my Celsius calculation. And we can see here, so for every degree Celsius this goes up above 25, we lose 0.48% of our power. So this is showing that we're going to be almost 13% down on power because the cell temperature is 52 degrees, which means we should be getting 204.5 watts. Now our BMS was reading 188, and the panel side of the charge controller was reading 7.79 amps at 25.88 volts, which comes out to 201.6 watts, which is 98.5% of our adjusted watts. So this is pretty slick. And my data previously said that these panels were within 1% or 2% of the 395 watt panels. So let's do that same math, those same calculations on my 395 watt Jinko panel, which has only been in the field for probably 6 months, so it's almost a brand new panel, and see what they come back to. All right, I've moved my temperature probe up into here and had it normalized to a temperature, and I've also got my leads for the solar panel connected up to the charge controller. You can see here, we're at 56, 57 degrees. We'll give it a slight advantage and say 56 because it's bouncing between the two. We are getting 306, it was at 309 a second ago, 308, we're gonna call it 309. I saw 309 a second ago. So 309 watts at the BMS, and here, we're getting about 10 amps at 34 volts. So let's go plug that into our spreadsheet. So we were calling it 56 Celsius. This temperature coefficient of power, you'll notice that it's a little better on the Jinko. So it's supposed to perform better in hot weather than the Sharp. Our BMS was reading, oh gosh, was it 309? It was 309. And so, another number I wasn't really talking about, that's actually showing 95%. You probably noticed that I did all of that testing using a multimeter and a clamp meter and a charge controller, and I had my Chinesium tester right here. Well, you see how this thing on the back says it's good for up to 60 volts? They weren't joking. It's also good for 800 watts. And I was like, well, I've got 475 watt panels here. That caused sparks, and after the sparks, no viewing on the screen. So I've got another one coming, but for today, I use the charge controller. So if you're gonna do what I did, get yourself one of these, because this just gives you a simple wattage number. Less calculating, more reliable, less human error involved. And get yourself a Klein multimeter. Get something with a contact probe for the temperature, not an infrared shoot it wireless temperature thing, because it's got to be calibrated for the surface that you're reading. And then the last thing you need is your inclinometer. Being cold is optional, but it's an inclinometer either way. Make sure that the panel is pointed right at the sun. I will publish that spreadsheet up on Google Drive so that you can access it if you want it. Of course, all the formulas and stuff are available via the great Google. This was fun. What I learned today, well, what I learned first of all was that the testing that I've done prior, which was not terribly scientific and was more relative than it was absolute, was right, because I was able to say this is a new panel, this is what this test set, and compare everything to that. And I'd say that I feel good about my testing in the past, but I really like that I can do it scientifically. And now it's going to be really interesting, because you notice that these panels are about 0.1% off in their temperature coefficient of P max, which means that the Jinkos should theoretically perform better than the Sharps in very hot temperatures. And that's something I would like to play around with, and I might have to wait till next summer when it's 105 degrees again to write that one down. But to put a few panels out and compare them according to their temperature coefficient of Pmax, their Pmax coefficient, to see how they actually perform according to their data sheet. Because I wonder how many of those data sheets are actually what they say they are. These seem to generally match. However, the Jinko didn't do as good as the Sharp, so maybe the Jinko one's lying a little bit. I don't know.